History wasn't written by the victors. It was rewritten by the survivors, the scholars, and the silent editors hiding behind royal seals. For every emperor who claimed glory, there was a hand behind the parchment, changing words, erasing names, and shaping the world we think we know. Tonight, we uncover the ghostwriters of history, the ones who changed the story itself. The world was once young, and words were magic. Long before the hum of printing presses or the click of keyboards, a single line carved into stone or a brushstroke on papyrus could define the memory of an entire civilization. In the quiet corners of temples, in the glow of oil lamps, the first record keepers worked. Their fingers were stained with ink, their hearts heavy with the weight of gods and kings. They were not warriors, nor priests, yet they held a power, greater than both, the power to decide what would be remembered and what would be forgotten. Imagine a warm night on the banks of the Nile. The air is thick with the scent of lotus and the gentle hum of insects. In a narrow chamber deep inside a temple, an Egyptian scribe bends over a sheet of papyrus. His brush moves slowly, carefully, every symbol a prayer, every stroke a promise. Outside, the world is ruled by pharaohs, living gods who command. Armies raise monuments and claim eternity as their inheritance. But it is the scribe, hidden in shadow, who ensures that eternity listens. For what is power, if no one remembers it? What is glory, if no one writes it down? The scribe dips his reed pen into ink made from soot and river water. He writes of the king's victories, of divine blessings, of endless order and prosperity. He does not write of the famine that took half the harvest, or the soldiers who never returned from distant lands. He cannot. The pen, though sacred, serves the crown. And so, history bends its knee to the will of the ruler, and the truth, fragile as papyrus itself, curls beneath the heat of the sun. Yet even as the scribe writes for the pharaoh, there is another story that whispers between his lines. It is the story of language itself, of humankind's first attempt to trap thought in symbols, to give permanence to the fleeting breath. To write was to speak to eternity. And in the ancient world, to control writing was to control the future. Dr. Scribes of Egypt were trained from childhood, their education long and merciless. They memorized thousands of symbols, learned to mix ink, to cut reeds, to carve onto stone. They became servants of both word and ritual. Some rose high in the royal court advising priests and princes. Others remained nameless, their hands crafting the words that would outlive them by millennia. Each knew that their script was sacred, a bridge between the world of men and the realm of the gods. Every word written was a spell, every record an offering to the divine. The same quiet power stirred in Mesopotamia, in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates. There, where the earth was rich and the rivers wild, the first cities were born, and with them, the first libraries. The scribes of Sumer pressed their styluses into wet clay, shaping wedge-like marks that captured trade deals, prayers, laws, and dreams. Under the watchful gaze of gods like Enlil and Inanna, they built an invisible empire, not of walls and weapons, but of words. In the city of Uruk, they wrote of kings who spoke to heaven, of floods that washed the world clean, of heroes who sought immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the earliest stories ever written, was not carved to entertain. It was a meditation on power, death, and the longing for eternal life, themes that echoed through every empire that followed. Those ancient writers understood something profound, that to be remembered is a kind of immortality, and to write is to conquer time itself. Centuries flowed like the rivers that shaped those lands. Empires rose, flourished, and crumbled into dust. But the scribes, or their spirit, endured. In Greece, the pen became a tool of reason. Words were no longer chained to temples or thrones. They were used to question, to explore, to debate the nature of existence. The philosophers wrote dialogues and arguments, lines that shimmered with the light of curiosity. Yet even here, the record of history remained in careful hands, Herodotus, often called the father of history, wandered through lands and stories, collecting tales of heroes and wars. But even he was a storyteller first, a man who mixed fact and fable with equal delight. His pen painted the Greeks as brave and free, and their enemies as strange, cruel, or divine. Was it truth? Or was it patriotism dressed in poetry? Perhaps it was both. For even as the Greeks gave birth to philosophy and democracy, their historians still wrote to shape the soul of their people. Across the sea, Rome learned quickly that the pen could rule as surely as the sword. The empire stretched, vast and glittering, its roads threading through continents, its legions marching beneath banners of destiny. But it was not the legions who made Rome eternal. It was the chroniclers, the poets, the bureaucrats who etched its triumphs into parchment and marble. They recorded laws, speeches, conquests. They praised the emperors, glorified their victories, and softened their sins. A pen dipped in flattery could build a god from a man, and many emperors were happy to let it. In candle-lit rooms, Roman historians shaped a vision of the empire as eternal, rational, divinely ordained. To write against that vision was dangerous. Yet beneath the surface, some voices dared to whisper another truth. Tacitus, the stern observer of imperial corruption, wrote that power always hides behind words, that every empire, no matter how great, begins to rot when its history becomes a mirror instead of a window. His words survived centuries of silence, buried and preserved, waiting to remind the world that even the most careful story can betray its authors. But most scribes did not challenge power. They served it. And in serving it, they shaped the imagination of the world. When a king ordered a monument inscribed, he was not merely marking stone, he was sculpting memory. The stele of Hammurabi, covered in laws and royal blessings, declared, "Justice as divine." The Rosetta Stone carved in 3 scripts proclaimed a ruler's generosity to gods and temples. Every inscription, every scroll was a message sent to eternity. I was here. I ruled. I mattered. And yet, what is remembered is not always what was real. The pen can smooth over wounds, transform defeats into victories, erase names as easily as it records them. In the royal courts of China, scholars wrote vast chronicles that traced the rise and fall of dynasties, always guided by the principle of the mandate of heaven, that cosmic right to rule. When emperors fell, their scribes rewrote the past to explain why. When new dynasties rose, the same pens blessed their triumphs. It was a cycle of ink and ideology, truth woven into myth until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Far to the east, in the ancient kingdoms of India, the storytellers sang epics that were as sacred as scripture. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana, massive rivers of verse, carried history, philosophy, and devotion in equal measure. The poets, guided by patrons and gods, did not merely write of battles and kings. They wove moral universes, teaching generations what duty, love, and righteousness should mean. The stories became living history, retold and reshaped across centuries. Here too the pen was power, softer perhaps than in the courts of emperors, but just as enduring. As night deepens and the ancient world turns in your imagination, you can almost hear the whisper of papyrus, the scratch of quills, the hum of words becoming memory. Each civilization had its own way of keeping time, its own vision of eternity, but all shared one secret. To control the written word was to control the world. Even religion was not immune. The holy texts of countless faiths began as oral stories, passed from voice to voice before being captured by the pen. When they were written down, they became law, doctrine, truth. The act of writing transformed belief into authority. A story spoken could change, a story written could command. Monks in candlelit monasteries copied sacred texts by hand, letter by letter for generations. Their work preserved not only faith but language itself. In their quiet devotion, they became heirs to the ancient scribes, caretakers of civilizations. Memory. Imagine one such monk in the early hours before dawn. The air is cold, the parchment pale. He traces each letter with care, knowing that his task is holy. But in the silence, he too feels the old burden, the awareness that what he writes will shape how others see the world. He could make a single change, a word, a phrase, and shift the meaning of centuries. Such is the power of the pen, silent, invisible, yet immense. And so history is written not by the strong but by the careful, not by those who wield swords but by those who wield sentences. Empires crumble, kings fall, temples sink into sand, yet the words remain. They outlive walls, armies, even languages. The clay tablets of Sumer still speak after 5,000 years. The hieroglyphs of Egypt still tell their stories, whispering through the cracks of time. But for every story that survives, countless others are lost. The fires of Alexandria, the ruins of libraries, the scrolls left to rot, each one a silence in our collective memory. How many truths have vanished because no one wrote them? How many voices were never heard because the pen served the throne, not the people? Even now, as the world hums with electric words and digital archives, the same ancient rhythm continues. The tools have changed, but the impulse remains to write, to remember, to define the story of who we are. We still craft our histories to comfort ourselves, to justify our choices, to give shape to our dreams. The pen, whether made of reed or steel or light, still carries the same power it held in the hands of those first record keepers beside the Nile. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear them still. The Egyptian scribe, the Babylonian chronicler, the Roman historian, all whispering across the centuries, each line of ink a bridge from their world to ours. They would smile, perhaps, to know that we still read their words, still search for truth among their symbols. For in their hearts, they knew that to write was to reach beyond death, to leave behind a spark that time could not extinguish. The world turns and empires fade, but the pen endures. Its power is not in the ink it spills, but in the minds it shapes. Every written word is a seed of memory, a fragment of thought cast into the endless soil of history. Some seeds wither, others bloom, but all belong to the same garden. The human longing to be known, to be remembered, to matter. So close your eyes now. Picture the endless night of ages past, the flicker of oil lamps in stone chambers, the soft sound of reed on papyrus, the steady heartbeat of civilizations writing themselves into being. The words drift like dust through time, settling gently into the pages of history. They are still there, waiting, whispering. In the end, all empires crumble, all kings turn to dust. But somewhere, in a fragment of clay or a faded manuscript, a scribe's careful line endures. A record of life, of faith, of pride. The pen, silent yet eternal, remains the last witness. And as you drift toward sleep, remember, history is not simply what happened, it is what was written. And those who wrote it, the keepers of memory, the shapers of time, live still in every story we tell, in every word we read, in every breath between truth and dream. The pen was their voice, the world, their page. There is a silence that lies beneath history. It lingers in the ashes of burned cities, in the gaps between ancient scrolls, in the shadows that words have forgotten. Every battle, every conquest, every empire that rose to greatness was built upon countless others that fell into dust. Their voices once filled the world, voices of mothers, of poets, of soldiers and scribes. But now they whisper only in fragments. The victors wrote their triumphs, their glory carved into stone and sung by generations. The vanquished, though, faded into silence. Yet if you listen closely, in the quiet moments between thought and dream, you can almost hear them still. The lost voices of the vanquished. Long ago, when the world was still divided by rivers and mountains, people told their stories by firelight. They passed their memories through song and tale, through carvings on walls and symbols in the sand. Each tribe, each kingdom, believed that their voice would endure. But history is a jealous keeper. It holds tightly to the stories it favors, and lets the others drift away like smoke. The first empires rose from conquest, and with every victory came a rewriting of the world. To conquer a people was to conquer their past, their gods, their heroes, their words. The victors did not simply destroy cities, they destroyed memory. Imagine the city of Troy. For centuries it was known only through a poem, a tale of glory and vengeance told by the Greeks. To the world, Troy was a legend, a backdrop for the wrath of Achilles, the cunning of Odysseus, the beauty of Helen. Yet who wrote from Troy's side? Who told the story of the mothers who watched their sons fall, of the elders who begged for mercy, of the children who saw their homes burn? No one. Their words were lost in the smoke of war. The Iliad survived. The voices of Troy did not. And so for millennia, the vanquished were remembered only through the eyes of those who defeated them. The same silence echoes through every age. When the Assyrians marched across the Near East, their stone reliefs boasted of victory. They carved images of bound prisoners, of kings kneeling, of cities aflame. To them this was justice, divine and inevitable. But on the other side of those stones, unseen, were the voices of those who had been conquered. The people of Babylon, the tribes of Israel, the countless nameless souls taken as slaves or scattered into exile. Their stories were not written in stone. They were written in grief, in tears, in memories that faded before they could be told. It is the same pattern repeated through time. The victors build monuments, the defeated vanish into ruin. The pharaohs of Egypt wrote their names on temple walls that reached toward the heavens, each inscription a declaration of eternal power. But in the dust beyond those walls lived the laborers who built them, men and women whose hands shaped the stones, whose sweat darkened the sand. Their names are gone. Their stories are unspoken. The kings are remembered. The people are forgotten. And yet, even in forgetting, there is a kind of presence. The lost voices still move beneath the surface of what we know, like echoes trapped under ice. When archaeologists brush away layers of dirt and time, they uncover fragments, a broken tablet, a faded mural, a line of poetry half erased. Each fragment hums faintly with life. A potter's mark, a prayer, a song scratched into clay. These are the whispers of those who had no victory to celebrate, only endurance. They speak not of conquest, but of survival, the quiet, stubborn will to keep being, even when the world has turned its face away. There was a time when the Library of Alexandria stood as a beacon of human knowledge. Within its walls were scrolls from every corner of the known world, words of mathematicians, poets, travelers, and kings. When it burned, centuries of thought turned to smoke. But more than Greek or Roman wisdom was lost that day. The works of Persians, of Egyptians, of forgotten islanders and wanderers vanished too. Cultures that had no empire left to protect their memory dissolved into ash. For every philosopher remembered by name, there were 100 thinkers whose ideas drifted away in silence. The fire did not only consume parchment, it consumed possibility. Imagine walking through one of those lost cities now. The moon is pale above the ruins, and the stones are cool beneath your feet. You feel the ghost of life in the air. Laughter that once echoed in courtyards, the rhythm of footsteps on cobbled streets, the scent of bread and smoke. The city may be gone, but it still breathes in the faint pulse of the earth. Perhaps it was once proud, filled with color and music. Perhaps its people believed they would last forever. But something came. An army, a storm, a slow decline, and the songs stopped. The victors moved on, the world forgot, yet the stones remember. Every ruin holds a memory that no book has kept. Across deserts and seas, other voices fell silent in the same way. The people of Carthage, whose city once rivaled Rome, are known to us mostly through Roman words. To Rome, Carthage was an enemy, a threat, a rival to be erased. And so it was, burned, leveled, cursed by the conquerors. The Roman historians wrote that it was justice, that it was destiny. But what of the Carthaginians? What of their sailors, their merchants, their poets, their children? What stories did they tell in their final nights before the city fell? No one can say. Their scrolls are gone, their language silent. Only shards remain, hints of a world that once was, voices faint as the wind off the sea. The vanquished have always spoken softly, because the world seldom listens. When the Spaniards came to the New World, they found empires vast and strange, the Aztecs, the Maya, the Inca, each with its own history, its own songs. The conquerors brought steel and scripture, and in the name of God they burned the codices of the Old World. Thousands of years of stories turned to flame. The temples fell, the languages dwindled, and new histories were written. Histories that spoke of savagery and salvation, never of loss. But beneath those new words, the old ones still stir. The voices of the vanquished still breathe in the patterns of the stars, in the shapes of mountains, in the songs that survived in secret, carried in whispers from mother to child. The pen silenced them for a time, but memory has its own ways of surviving. There are whispers, too, from the Celtic tribes who once ruled the green lands of Europe. The Romans called them barbarians, painted them as wild, fierce, untamed. Their stories were not written down. Their bards carried them in song. When Rome came, those songs were scattered to the winds. The empire recorded its victories, its roads, its laws. The Celts became a footnote, their gods forgotten, their voices turned to myth. Yet sometimes, in the mist of dawn, or the rhythm of an old folk melody, something of them returns. The human soul, it seems, never vanishes entirely. It lingers, patient, waiting to be remembered. Even in later centuries, when ink replaced stone and paper replaced clay, the same silence persisted. The chronicles of kings filled shelves, but the journals of peasants, the letters of lovers, the laments of the defeated rarely survived. Wars were recorded as victories, not as tragedies. Revolutions were told through the eyes of those who won them. The oppressed wrote in secret, in margins, in coded words. Some were found and destroyed. Others lay hidden for generations, only to be discovered when the world was finally ready to listen. The vanquished speak not only through ruins and relics, but through the gaps in our knowledge, the places where history stutters, where questions remain unanswered. Why did certain civilizations vanish without trace? Why do some stories end abruptly as if the world itself looked away? Perhaps because the storytellers were silenced, their pens broken, their tongues bound. But silence, too, is a kind of record. It marks the edges of what was lost. In that silence there is sorrow, but also beauty. The lost voices remind us that history is not complete, that what we know is only a fraction of what once was. Each name forgotten, each story untold, is a reminder that the human heart beats beyond the reach of power. Empires may erase, but they cannot undo the truth of having lived. Even those erased from the page have left their touch upon the world. In the tools we use, the words we speak, the myths we inherit without knowing their origin. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the chorus of humanity. Not the loud song of conquerors, but the gentle hum beneath it. Hear the weaver at her loom in a lost village by the Indus. Hear the farmer in a field once tilled by forgotten hands. Hear the lullabies of languages no one speaks anymore, the prayers whispered in temples long buried beneath the sand. These are the true voices of the vanquished, not gone, only quiet. Time, in its strange mercy, sometimes returns what it has taken. The walls of Nineveh, once thought to be legend, rose again from the earth when archaeologists brushed away the dust. The tablets of forgotten languages spoke once more when their symbols were deciphered. A single piece of pottery, a single scrap of papyrus, can revive a world. The lost voices wait patiently in the soil, in the caves, in the depths of oceans, for someone to listen again. They have waited for thousands of years, and still they whisper as softly as dreams. And perhaps that is the real truth of history, that nothing is ever truly gone. The voices of the vanquished live in us, in our questions, in our empathy. Every time we wonder what became of them, every time we try to imagine their world, we give them breath again. The historian may seek facts, but the dreamer seeks souls. In the quiet of night, When the noise of modern life fades, their stories rise like mist, filling the air with memory. Think of all the unnamed ones who carried the world forward, the builders who raised temples they would never enter, the scribes, whose hands copied the words of kings but never their own, the mothers who taught songs to their children knowing those songs might be the last thing their people would ever have. They are the invisible authors of history, the ones who built everything we stand upon. And though their names are gone, their presence remains in every breath of the human story. The conquerors believed they could erase them, but they were wrong. The earth itself remembers. In the patterns of wind over ruins, in the soft erosion of stone, the story continues. When a historian lifts a fragment from the dirt, when a poet writes of loss, when someone wonders what was forgotten, the vanquished speak again. Their silence becomes song. As you drift towards sleep, imagine them gathering, the countless souls who were written out of history. The fallen warriors of forgotten armies, the enslaved who built empires, the storytellers whose tongues were cut short, the artists whose work was lost to fire. They stand not in sorrow, but in quiet pride. For though their names are gone, their essence endures in every act of remembrance. You are listening to them now, in this moment of stillness. You are part of their chorus. History, after all, is not fixed. It is alive, breathing, changing with every retelling. The victors may have written the first drafts, but the vanquished are still writing the rest, through us, through every question, every dream, every search for truth. The burned libraries, the fallen walls, the broken statues, they are not endings but beginnings waiting to be spoken again. The night grows deep. The stars above you have seen it all. The rise and fall of kingdoms, the fire of conquest, the long silence that followed. And still they shine, indifferent yet eternal. Beneath their light the earth keeps its secrets, holding tight the lost voices until we are ready to hear. Perhaps we never truly lose anything. Perhaps the stories of the vanquished simply wait, patient and kind, for the world to fall quiet, enough to listen. So listen. Let the silence speak. Let it tell you of all that was and all that might have been. Feel the slow heartbeat of time, the soft rustle of forgotten pages, the hum of memory beneath the noise of centuries. The vanquished are not gone. They are here, in the dust, in the stars, in the pulse of your own heart. They live in the quiet truth that every life, no matter how lost, no matter how unrecorded, leaves a mark upon the world. And as you drift deeper into rest, imagine their words like a tide, gentle and eternal, washing through the ages. The sea. Battles may be over, the victors long dead, but the story continues, carried on the breath of those who once were silenced. The lost voices are not lost at all. They are simply waiting to be heard again, in dreams, in whispers, in the tender stillness of the night. The world once slept in darkness. After the empires fell and the roads crumbled, after the marble statues were buried under dust, Europe forgot the sound of its own voice. The libraries were ashes, the cities quiet. The great halls of learning that once sang with philosophers and poets had grown cold. The stars still burned above, but for a time no one could read them. And yet, in that long night, tiny lights remained. In small stone rooms behind thick monastery walls, the flicker of candles kept knowledge alive. There, in the stillness of the dark ages, monks bent over parchment, their breath ghosting in the cold air, their pens whispering across the page. They wrote not for fame or fortune, but for faith. Each stroke was a prayer, each line an offering to God. Outside the world might burn, but within those walls they built a quiet sanctuary of ink and devotion. Theirs was a fragile task, to preserve what the world had nearly lost, the words of Rome, of Greece, of the ancients who had dreamed before them. But in saving those words, they sometimes changed them too. It is night in an old abbey. The wind hums through the cracks in the stone, and the only sound inside is the scratch of a quill. A monk leans over his desk, a single candle beside him. His fingers are stiff from cold. The ink freezes slightly at the tip, but he continues copying line after line from a manuscript older than his memory. The letters curl in beautiful black shapes across the parchment. Latin, the sacred tongue. He does not understand all of it. Some words are Greek, others strange from forgotten lands. But he copies them faithfully, carefully, because to make a mistake in scripture, in scholarship, is to wound the truth itself. He dips his pen again. The candle flickers. Outside, a storm rolls over the hills. Inside, the monk is a bridge between ages, one hand reaching back to the wisdom of a world long gone, the other stretching forward to a future that does not yet know his name. But even faith has its shadows. The monks were not just guardians of the past. They were interpreters, translators, editors. Their pens, like the scribes of Egypt or Rome before them, had power. In the silence of their scriptoria, they could tilt the meaning of a word, soften a sentence, erase a name, sometimes by accident, sometimes by purpose. In the hands of men who believed they served divine will, the truth could be reshaped to fit belief. They copied the works of Plato and Aristotle, but often through the lens of faith. Pagan wisdom was filtered through holy understanding, purified by prayer. Where a philosopher once wrote of many gods, a monk might see only shadows of the one true God. Where a poet sang of fate, the monk might whisper of providence. And thus, the words of the ancients were reborn, half remembered, half rewritten, clothed in the robes of the church. The candle burns lower. Another monk enters quietly, placing a new sheet of vellum on the table. It took weeks to prepare. The skin of a calf, washed, stretched, scraped thin until it was smooth enough for ink. Each page is a small miracle of patience and craft. Books in this age are not common things. They are treasures, each one worth a lifetime of labor. The monks treat them like relics, binding them in leather, sealing them with clasps of brass. When a manuscript is finished, it is placed in the monastery library, a cool, dim room where light is scarce and silence eternal. The shelves smell of wax and dust and old skin. Some books are chained to the tables, too precious to be taken. Others lie open, their letters shining faintly in the dimness. A visitor might see them and imagine they sleep, dreaming of the worlds they contain. The monks themselves rarely question what they copy. For many, writing is not understanding. It is obedience. The abbot tells them what to transcribe: the Gospels, the saints' lives, the sermons of long-dead bishops. But alongside the holy texts, other words sometimes survive: poems of Virgil, treatises of Cicero, fragments of lost histories. The monks keep them because they recognize something sacred even in pagan thought: a flicker of reason, a spark of divine order. They call it the wisdom of the ancients, a gift placed before Christianity to prepare the world for truth. Yet not every text is saved. Some are burned. Some are quietly set aside, deemed too dangerous, too heretical, too strange. The decision lies with the abbots and sometimes with the church itself. Thus, through the centuries, knowledge becomes a river narrowed by faith, flowing but redirected. What remains will shape the future. What is lost will haunt it. In the stillness of the night, as the monks write, they sometimes imagine the souls of the old authors hovering near, watching their words be reborn. Perhaps Aristotle frowns to see his meaning shifted, or Ovid smiles to find his verses written beside a psalm. The monks are translators of time, blending myth with scripture, reason with revelation. Their pens are bridges between worlds, but bridges can change the land they cross. Sometimes, when their eyes grow tired and the candlelight wavers, the monks add their own thoughts to the margins. Small notes, prayers, jokes, even complaints about the cold or the dullness of the task. "I am so tired," one might write. "Pray for the hand that copies this." Another might sketch a small animal, a doodle in the corner of eternity. These human touches, preserved in the manuscripts, remind us that behind every book, there were hands, eyes, hearts beating quietly in the dark. But not all writing was innocent. There were times when the monks shaped history deliberately, guided by fear and faith in equal measure. Legends grew under their pens: saints who healed the sick, martyrs who spoke after death, kings chosen by God. Myths became truth through ink, and once written, they were believed. A miracle copied into a chronicle was no longer story. It was history. In this way, the monasteries did not just preserve the past, they created it. When ancient heroes were forgotten, the monks gave them Christian names. When pagan gods lingered in folk tales, the monks transformed them into demons or angels. The world was rewritten to fit divine order, and soon no one remembered what had been changed. The myths of the old world became the miracles of the new. Outside the monastery walls, the world was harsh. Wars raged, kingdoms rose and fell, plagues swept through villages. But inside, the rhythm was steady. The toll of bells, the chanting of psalms, the endless copying of words. Time itself seemed to slow, measured not by years, but by manuscripts, completed. In Ireland, on the edge of the known world, monks worked by the sea, their abbeys battered by wind and salt. There, they illuminated their manuscripts with gold and bright color, turning words into art. The pages glowed with intricate spirals, beasts, and angels, a tapestry of belief and beauty. The Book of Kells, still radiant today, was born from such hands. Those monks believed they were not merely writing. They were worshipping through art. Each letter was a devotion, each curve a hymn. Farther south, in Italy and France, other monasteries became havens for scholars. Monks translated the works of ancient philosophers into Latin and sometimes into the languages of the people. They preserved fragments of medicine, astronomy, and law. Without them, the wisdom of the ancient world might have vanished entirely. Yet what they copied, they also shaped. The margins of old Greek texts filled with commentary, interpretations guided by faith. What had once been curiosity became theology. Knowledge was allowed, but only if it bowed before belief. In the long, dark nights of winter, the monks gathered in the refectory to read aloud. By candlelight, they told the lives of saints, the battles of angels, the words of prophets. The stories echoed through the halls, mingling with the sound of the wind. For the people who lived beyond the monastery gates, farmers, peasants, travelers, the monks were keepers of truth. Their words carried the weight of eternity, and yet, much of what they shared was already touched by legend. Over time, the line between myth and history faded until they became one. Consider the tale of King Arthur. Once perhaps, a real man, a warlord in the misty hills of Britain, but as monks copied and retold his story, he became something more. A Christian king chosen by God, his knights symbols of virtue, his battles metaphors for faith. The pagan elements were softened, the wild magic turned to moral lesson. The quills of countless monks shaped him into legend. What began as memory became myth, and what was myth became holy. Such transformations happened everywhere. Old gods became saints, ancient festivals became Christian feasts. The monks did not always mean to deceive. They sought harmony between old and new, light and darkness. But in doing so, they rewrote the soul of Europe. Sometimes, alone at night, a monk might wonder whether he was saving truth or changing it. He might pause with his pen in hand, staring into the candle flame, feeling the centuries behind and before him. What if the words he copied were not meant to be saved? What if he misunderstood their meaning? He would pray, then write on. 4. In the monastery, doubt was a sin best buried beneath devotion. The scriptoria were small worlds unto themselves, long narrow rooms filled with desks, windows placed high to let in light but not distraction. The air smelled of parchment and ink, of oil lamps and old wool. The sound of quills moving together was like the rustle of leaves. Dozens of hands working in unison, day after day, year after year. Some monks went blind before their work was done. Others died mid-sentence, their pens falling silent but their words continuing through another's hand. In that endless chain of copying, time itself seemed to fold, and as they wrote, the world slowly began to awaken. Their manuscripts traveled, from monastery to monastery, from kingdom to kingdom. Scholars began to read, to compare, to question. The seeds of learning that the monks had guarded so carefully began to sprout again. Universities were born from monastic schools, libraries grew, and knowledge spread like light returning after a long night. When the Renaissance came, it found its roots in those dimly lit rooms. The ancient texts rediscovered by humanist scholars were often the same ones monks had preserved, shaped, yes, altered at times, but alive. Without the monks, there would have been no rebirth, no rediscovery of the classical world. Their fear and faith, their reverence and restraint, had carried civilization through its sleep. And yet, as the centuries passed, new thinkers looked back and wondered what had been lost, what truths had been changed by trembling hands, what voices silenced by piety. They searched the old manuscripts for clues, for errors, for the fingerprints of those who had copied before them. In the soap margins, they found traces of humanity, laughter, fatigue, doubt. The monks had been mortal after all, not divine, but their devotion had built the bridge from darkness into dawn. Now as you listen, you can almost hear them still, the faint scratching of quills, the turning of pages, the murmur of prayers, echoing through stone halls. The candlelight dances on the walls, casting shadows shaped like angels, like ghosts of words. The monks are long gone, their abbeys in ruins or reborn as museums, but their work endures in every book, every story, every written thought that followed. The myths they copied, the manuscripts they guarded, the mistakes they made, all of it became part of the great story of humankind. Knowledge did not survive in spite of the darkness. It survived because of those who held it close, even imperfectly. The monk's faith may have changed the past, but it also protected the future. The candle burns low once more. The room grows colder. Outside, the night is vast and quiet. Inside, the last monk of the evening closes his book, presses his seal into wax, and bows his head. His work will be read by eyes he will never know, in times he cannot imagine. He does not know that centuries later his handwriting will be studied, his small notes in the margin loved for their humanness. He simply believes he has done God's work. As he leaves the scriptorium, the candle gutters and goes out, but the words remain, glowing softly in the darkness, alive in their silence. Somewhere, another monk will begin again tomorrow, and another, after him, until the light of knowledge fills the world once more. And now, as you drift into sleep, imagine the slow turning of centuries, the patient hum of pens, the warmth of candles against cold stone. Hear the voices of the monks, murmured prayers, whispered Latin, the quiet rhythm of faith and ink. The world outside fades away, and you are in that ancient room, surrounded by words that have survived 1,000 years. The night deepens. The manuscripts breathe softly on their shelves. The myths sleep within them, waiting to be read again. The monks are gone, but their work endures. Fragile, eternal, a reminder that even in the darkest of ages, light can be written into being. The world of kings and queens has always been wrapped in splendor, mystery, and the quiet hum of manipulation. Long before television screens and social media feeds, power found its voice in parchment, in paint, and in poetry. Every throne was not just built on gold or conquest, but on stories carefully crafted to shape how the world would remember a ruler. The true art of monarchy wasn't only ruling, it was storytelling. And those stories, whispered through court, poets, chroniclers, and painters became the earliest propaganda machines in history. Imagine a candlelit chamber in a medieval castle. A king sits at a long table while a poet recites verses about his victories. The words rise and fall like a soft tide, painting him not as a man with flaws or fears, but as a hero chosen by destiny. Outside, the real world may tell another story. Villages, ruined by war, fields scorched, taxes crushing the poor. But inside the castle, the poet's voice rewrites it all. The listeners nod in approval. History at that moment is not truth, it is theater. From the earliest empires, rulers understood that power was fragile without belief. Pharaohs of Egypt had their deeds carved into stone, not merely as record, but as divine proof of their immortality. When they conquered, the carvings showed them as giants trampling enemies underfoot. When they lost, the stones remained silent. There were no stories of defeat, No mention of weakness. The pen, or in this case the chisel, erased failure as easily as it carved glory. Centuries later, the Romans perfected the craft. Emperors like Augustus mastered propaganda through architecture and poetry. The poet Virgil wrote the Aeneid, a sweeping epic that transformed Rome's origins into divine destiny. Aeneas, the hero, was not just a Trojan refugee. He was the forefather of the Roman people, his journey blessed by gods. Through this story, Augustus linked himself to myth, not as a ruler by chance, but as the fulfillment of prophecy. The people believed Rome's greatness was written in the stars, and Augustus became more than a man, he became a legend. The empire's marble temples, triumphal arches, and poetic verses all sang the same tune. Rome was eternal, and so was its ruler. But propaganda didn't always roar through empires. Sometimes it whispered in monasteries and libraries, in the hands of quiet chroniclers who decided what to include and what to omit. In medieval Europe, the church became the keeper of the pen, and kings learned to write their stories within its approval. Chronicles of the time often began with divine signs, stars aligning, angels blessing births, saints predicting royal success. Even the bloodiest conquests were written as righteous wars, battles fought not for greed but for God. The truth became secondary to the moral lesson, and the lesson always favored the crown. Painters, too, served the throne. Their brushes became as powerful as swords. In Renaissance courts, portraits were not mere likenesses, they were illusions of perfection. Elizabeth Thorne of England was painted with porcelain skin, flawless and timeless, her gowns shimmering with symbolic jewels. Each color, each object told a silent story: purity, wisdom, strength. The real Elizabeth, aging and weary from decades of rule, was hidden beneath layers of idealized paint. Her subjects never saw their queen as a mortal woman. They saw an icon, untouchable and eternal. And that was the point. In France, Louis XIV turned propaganda into spectacle. The Sun King bathed his reign in grandeur, surrounding himself with mirrors, dancers, and symphonies. He turned his palace, Versailles, into a living symbol of divine order. Every hallway, every fountain, every painting reinforced the message. Louis was not merely ruling France, he was France. Artists, architects, and poets built a world around his glory. Even the daily rituals of his life became theater, performed before nobles who learned that loyalty to the king meant proximity to power. Yet propaganda wasn't only about beauty. Sometimes it took the form of fear. Rulers learned that control over the story could silence rebellion before it began. The Roman emperors had poets, the medieval kings had chroniclers, the modern monarchs had newspapers. Each used the medium of their age to protect their image. When Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church, his scribes didn't write him as a heretic. They wrote him as a liberator, chosen by God to free England from corruption. His marriages, his executions, his greed, all were recast as divine necessity. The truth was bloodier, but the story was cleaner. In Eastern courts, similar patterns emerged. The Chinese emperors had historians who carefully recorded events, always mindful of what would please the throne. The Persian kings commissioned epic poems like the Shahnameh, blending myth and monarchy until the two became inseparable. These works did more than entertain. They taught obedience. They reminded the people that rulers were reflections of the heavens, their reigns part of a cosmic order too sacred to question. Over time, propaganda evolved alongside technology. The printing press allowed monarchs to reach beyond their courts. Pamphlets, decrees, and illustrated books spread their messages across nations. During the Reformation and Renaissance, rival rulers fought not only on battlefields, but in print. Images of kings as saints or demons circulated like wildfire. Every painting, every poem became a weapon in a war of perception. Even music carried the message. Court composers wrote symphonies that glorified their patrons. Anthems proclaimed unity, loyalty, and divine favor. When these melodies echoed through cathedrals or city squares, they became emotional propaganda, soundtracks to authority. The people might never read royal decrees, but they would hum the songs of their rulers. Behind these grand displays, however, were the artists themselves, the scribes, poets, and painters who often lived in quiet contradiction. They were witnesses to truth but servants to power. Some struggled with what they were asked to create. Others learned to weave subtle honesty into their flattery, leaving small traces of reality between the lines. A poet might slip a warning into a praise-filled verse. A painter might soften a king's eyes, showing a hint of doubt. These quiet acts of resistance were invisible to most, but they kept a spark of truth alive. As centuries passed, the art of royal storytelling became more refined. Monarchs sponsored entire histories written in their honor. The tone was always grand, the language divine. Failures became lessons, cruelty became strength, and victories became destiny. The more the people believed these stories, the more stable the crown became. Power, after all, depends not just on armies, but on imagination. And imagination was the kingdom's true currency. When people saw their rulers as chosen, holy, or eternal, they accepted the burdens of obedience more easily. Taxes, wars, and decrees became part of a larger plan, blessed by fate. Propaganda turned power into faith, and faith once rooted could not be argued away. Yet every story leaves shadows. For every king painted as noble, there were countless subjects unseen. The peasants, the soldiers, the forgotten, all disappeared from the royal portraits. Their suffering was edited out, their voices buried beneath gold leaf and poetic verse. Propaganda, in its beauty, also became a form of silence. It didn't lie outright. It simply chose which truths to ignore. As history marched forward, some rulers lost control of their own myths. The French Revolution shattered the illusion of divine kingship. Paintings of Louis XVI's grandeur turned to caricatures of his weakness. Propaganda became a double-edged sword. It could build legends, but it could also destroy them. When the people learned to read, to print, and to question, the old machinery of royal storytelling began to crumble. The same tools that once glorified power now exposed it. Still, the legacy of those early propaganda machines never vanished. They laid the foundation for every modern form of image-making. The speeches, portraits, and ceremonies of kings became the templates for modern politics and celebrity culture. Every carefully framed photograph, every public address, every media appearance owes something to those ancient techniques of persuasion. The monarch's painter became the modern photographer. The court poet became the spin doctor. The royal chronicler evolved into the press secretary. The tools changed, but the purpose remained, to control the story. And perhaps that is the most lasting truth. Power and storytelling have always been intertwined. Without a narrative, authority is just force. But with a story, it becomes destiny. A king with a good poet could live forever in memory. A queen with a skilled painter could remain ageless, her portrait defying time. The real people, their doubts, their cruelty, their humanity, fade into the background, replaced by symbols crafted to endure. Now, as you drift deeper into thought, imagine those quiet rooms again. The scribes hunched over scrolls, the painters mixing their colors by lamplight, the poets reciting lines to please their lords. They were not warriors or rulers, but their work outlasted every sword. Their pens shaped empires not through conquest but through imagination. They built myths so powerful that even centuries later, we still believe parts of them. And in that soft space between truth and story, between power and art, lies the echo of all those royal propaganda machines, gentle, grand, and eternal. The kings and queens they served are long gone, their crowns turned to dust. But the stories remain, sleeping quietly in paintings, poems, and chronicles, waiting for curious minds to awaken them again. Close your eyes and let the images fade. The candlelight, the gilded halls, the whispered flattery of poets. Listen instead to the faint scratching of a quill, the rhythm of a brush on canvas. Those sounds are history being rewritten, one careful stroke at a time. Every line, every verse, every color was chosen not to record the truth but to create it. And as you drift toward sleep, remember this: power fades, but stories endure. And the storytellers, those unseen architects of memory, were the true rulers all along. There is a quiet art to erasing the truth. It does not happen with a shout or a battle, but with a whisper, a quiet stroke of ink, a decree signed in the shadows. Empires throughout history have known this art well. They understood that power was not only held in armies or gold, but in the control of what people could know, what they could read, what they could remember. The story of censorship is the story of power's greatest illusion, the belief that truth can be silenced, reshaped, or forgotten. Yet every erased line leaves a trace, and every forbidden word continues to echo softly, waiting to be found again. Imagine a library lit by the flicker of oil lamps, shelves heavy with scrolls and manuscripts. Outside, the sound of soldiers' boots grows near. They enter quietly, not to loot but to select. Some scrolls are pulled down, others left untouched. The chosen ones will be burned, their ashes scattered. The rest will be declared approved. What disappears in the flames is not just paper, it is memory. A voice, a thought, a question that once existed, now gone. This was how empires kept order, not through the sword alone but through silence. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were more than rulers. They were gods in flesh, and no god could be wrong. When a dynasty fell, the new one often erased the names of the old. Temples were defaced, monuments chiseled clean, inscriptions altered so that history appeared seamless, eternal, loyal only to the present ruler. To read an unedited history of Egypt today is almost impossible. Every stone carries both what was written and what was removed. The walls of their temples are not just decoration. They are battlefields of truth. Centuries later, the Roman Empire inherited this delicate craft of censorship. The emperors were masters of propaganda and suppression. Books that questioned their rule were banned. Authors who criticized the state were exiled or executed. The philosopher Seneca wrote carefully, weaving moral wisdom in ways that could not easily be seen as disloyalty. Others were less fortunate. The poet Ovid, whose verses of love and wit displeased Augustus, was sent away to die in exile. His book survived, but his name was a warning. Even the mighty Roman historians like Tacitus and Suetonius wrote their works under the shadow of censorship. They recorded what they could, hinted at what they dared, and left silences where truth might have been too dangerous. The pattern continued through centuries. When the Roman Empire turned Christian, censorship changed shape, but not purpose. Heresy replaced treason as the crime of thought. Libraries were sordid, scrolls rewritten, and entire philosophies condemned. The old pagan texts were locked away or burned, their gods reduced to superstition. The New World Order demanded a single truth. One church, one faith, one version of history. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, monks became the new gatekeepers of knowledge. They copied texts by hand, deciding what was worth saving. A single word, a single phrase could vanish with the slip of a quill. Some texts were corrected to align with church doctrine. Others were hidden entirely. The shelves of those monasteries held both light and shadow, the wisdom of the ancients alongside the weight of what could not be said. The church called it preservation. In truth, it was purification, and purification is only another name for erasure. The Renaissance brought new light, but even light can be controlled. The invention of the printing press made words harder to contain, yet rulers and priests quickly learned to regulate it. Every printer required a license. Every book needed approval. The Index of Forbidden Books became one of history's most ambitious attempts to silence dissent. Galileo's works on astronomy, Erasmus's writings on reform, and countless others were banned, edited, or destroyed. The church feared ideas as much as it feared armies. For ideas could move faster, reach farther, and outlast any kingdom. Meanwhile, monarchs across Europe followed the same pattern. Kings declared which histories could be told, which poets could write, which truths could be spoken. In France, Louis XIV allowed no criticism of his divine rule. In England, playwrights like Shakespeare learned to flatter the crown while concealing dangerous truths between their lines. The most brilliant art of the age was often born not of freedom, but of fear, the fear of saying too much. Censorship did not always silence creativity. Sometimes it shaped it, forcing writers and artists to become subtle, symbolic, and sly. But there were those who refused to bend. In secret rooms, banned manuscripts were copied by hand, passed from one trusted reader to another. These were the underground rivers of truth, flowing beneath the surface of empire. In Spain, forbidden scientific texts circulated under false titles. In Italy, reformers hid their writings in coded language. In Russia, centuries later, samizdat would become the term for self-published forbidden works, a silent rebellion carried by paper. Censorship has always worn the mask of protection. It promises to defend morality, faith, or stability. But beneath that promise lies fear, the fear that truth will undo the fragile web of power. Empires have always claimed that certain knowledge is too dangerous for ordinary minds. The forbidden, they say, must be forbidden for the greater good. Yet history shows that every time truth is suppressed, curiosity grows stronger. The more tightly a ruler grips control over words, the more people begin to whisper them in secret. During the Enlightenment, censorship faced its greatest challenge. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot wrote boldly, knowing their works might be banned or burned. They used irony as a weapon, laughter as a shield. Their words slipped through cracks in censorship disguised as satire or allegory. And when the French Revolution erupted, it did so partly because of those words, because truth, once silenced, had gathered too much pressure to remain hidden. The guillotine ended kings, but not censorship. Even the new regimes that followed quickly learned to control the press, proving again that power, in any form, fears the free word. As the centuries turned, empires changed, but their habits remained. The British Empire, proud of its enlightenment, censored its colonies. Newspapers in India could not print anything that questioned the crown. In Russia, under the Tsars, literature passed through the hands of government censors who blacked out entire passages. The poet Pushkin's letters were opened and read before delivery. Later, under Stalin, censorship became industrial, a machinery of silence that rewrote textbooks, erased faces from photographs, and made history itself a weapon. People disappeared not only from the world but from memory. Their names could not be spoken. Their words were scrubbed from every record. To forget became patriotic duty. The same was true in Nazi Germany, where book burnings became public ritual. Flames rose into the night as students tossed works by Jewish, communist, or degenerate authors into pyres. The burning of books was never about books. It was about control over imagination. A mind that can imagine alternatives is a mind that cannot be ruled completely. So the flames were meant not just to destroy pages but to teach obedience. Even in more modern times, censorship found new disguises. It no longer always appeared as bans or burnings. Sometimes it came as pressure, persuasion, or revision. School textbooks softened atrocities. Governments promoted patriotic versions of history, and journalists learned which stories to avoid. The truth became negotiable, rewritten for comfort, for convenience, or for profit. The pen, once feared, was now managed. And in this management, the old art of silence continued. In every age, those who seek truth have faced the same question. Is silence safety or is it surrender? The answer has rarely been simple. Many writers chose exile rather than silence. Others hid their truths in fables, myths, and poetry. Some paid the ultimate price for a sentence spoken too boldly. Their sacrifice reminds us that truth, once forbidden, becomes sacred. And yet, for all the power of censorship, the truth never truly dies. It burrows deep into the corners of memory. It survives in fragments, in a half-burned letter, a faded inscription, a story told by one generation to the next. Archaeologists uncover lost tablets. Historians decode forgotten manuscripts. And suddenly, the voices once silenced speak again. The ancient philosophers, the banned poets, the vanished historians, all return, defying the empires that sought to erase them. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them. The quiet defiance of a monk who hides a banned text in his robes. The soft scratch of a scribe copying forbidden words in the dim light. The murmured reading of a poem passed secretly between hands. These moments are small, but together they form a rebellion older than any empire. The rebellion of truth against silence. There is something strangely comforting in this cycle. Every power that silences truth believes it can last forever, yet all eventually crumble. The ashes of burned books fertilize the soil of new ideas. Every banned word becomes a seed. The censors may win the day, but never the centuries. Time is the great undoer of lies. Now, as you let your thoughts drift, imagine all those libraries, lost and rebuilt, all those pages burned and rediscovered. Imagine the ghosts of those who wrote what they were told not to write. The philosophers in exile, the poets in prisons, the teachers who whispered truth in secret classrooms. Their courage did not destroy the empires that censored them, but it outlasted them. The ink they spilled has traveled farther than any army, reaching you even now across oceans of time. So close your eyes and think of truth as something alive, not fragile, but patient. It waits in silence beneath the surface of official stories. It survives every erasure, every law, every decree. It is the quiet heartbeat of history, always there, even when you cannot hear it. Empires come and go. Their banners fade, their monuments crumble. But the censored truths, the forbidden words, the lost names, the voices once silenced, they endure, whispered softly through the corridors of time. And somewhere, someone always listens. The story of history has never been a fixed one. It has always been a living thing, molded, trimmed, rewritten, and retold to suit the needs of those who hold the pen. The faces of power have changed through time, but the old instinct to shape memory remains. Once it was the scribes of pharaohs, then the poets of kings. Now it is editors, journalists, educators, and speechwriters who weave the narratives that become our truth. The world may call itself modern, but the art of rewriting history has never disappeared. It has simply grown more subtle, more polished, more hidden beneath layers of reason and respectability. The ghostwriters of history are still here. Imagine a classroom filled with sunlight. Students open their textbooks, believing they are reading the story of their world, the wars, the inventions, the revolutions. The words seem certain, the tone confident. But what they are truly reading is a version of truth carefully chosen. Each line, each date, each photograph has passed through invisible hands, committees, editors, ministries, publishers. These unseen authors decide what to include, what to soften, what to omit entirely. And in that silence between what is printed and what is missing lies the ghostly touch of control. Every nation tells its story differently. One country's liberation is another's invasion. One empire's glory is another people's tragedy. In the pages of modern textbooks, the victors still speak the loudest. The ancient art of crafting favorable memory has simply taken new tools, printing presses, media networks, digital archives. But the goal remains the same, to create a version of the past that flatters the present. Take, for instance, how wars are remembered. In one country, soldiers are celebrated as heroes defending freedom. In another, the same war is taught as an act of aggression. The facts, dates, battles, treaties may be the same, but the story changes depending on who tells it. History becomes a mirror reflecting the needs of the nation, not the truth of the event. Governments fund school curriculums not only to educate, but to preserve identity. And identity for those in power is too precious to leave unguarded. Modern propaganda no longer needs statues or murals. It works quietly through words, images, and repetition. A speech delivered at a national celebration can reshape collective memory in minutes. Politicians speak of the great past to justify the present. They invoke ancestors, heroes, and golden ages that may never have existed. The crowd listens, nods, and feels proud. Because belief in a shared story is comforting. It creates unity. It gives meaning. And it keeps people from questioning the cracks beneath the surface. The media plays its own role in this ongoing authorship of reality. News channels and online platforms present themselves as truth-tellers, But behind the headlines lie agendas, alliances, and selective framing. A single photograph can shape opinion. A single omission can erase it. Modern censorship rarely bans ideas outright, it simply overwhelms them with louder ones. The technique is elegant. Drown truth in noise. Instead of burning books, today's empires flood the world with endless information so that the truth becomes indistinguishable from opinion. Somewhere in this chaos, modern ghostwriters operate. Anonymous editors polishing speeches, rewriting official statements, smoothing away uncomfortable phrases. They know that language is power and they wield it like artists. A single change of wording can shift blame, inspire patriotism, or erase guilt. When a government admits mistakes were made, the passive voice hides the actor. When a report says history is complex, it means something simple has been hidden. The ghosts know how to speak without saying, how to tell without revealing. Even academia, once a fortress of objectivity, has its own quiet compromises. Scholars depend on funding, publishers, and reputation. Research that challenges dominant narratives often struggles to find support. The guardians of history are not always its protectors. Sometimes they are its editors, cutting and reshaping truth to fit the comfort of convention. Universities, museums, and even documentaries present curated knowledge, framed, sanitized, digestible. The deeper complexities are left for footnotes no one reads, but perhaps the most powerful ghostwriters of history are not governments or institutions. They are us, the collective consciousness of a society that prefers comforting myths to unsettling truths. We repeat the stories we were taught because they make sense of the world. We celebrate national holidays without questioning the real origins behind them. We share quotes online, simplified and misattributed, until they become truer than truth itself. Memory once created demands belief, and belief, once shared, becomes history. In this way, every generation edits the past. We rename streets, replace monuments, rewrite curricula, and reinterpret old events in the light of new values. What once was called conquest becomes colonization. What once was pride becomes shame. The pendulum of memory swings endlessly, each era adjusting the lens. Yet behind each correction lies the same impulse: to shape the story so it serves us. We no longer need to please gods or kings. We only need to please ourselves. Technology has made this rewriting faster, quieter, more complete. A line can be deleted from an online article in seconds. A video can be re-edited to change its meaning. Digital archives can be modified, photographs retouched, timelines rewritten without a trace. In ancient times, a king had to chisel away names from stone. Now, history can be altered with a few keystrokes. The ghosts no longer haunt libraries. They haunt servers. They drift through code, rearranging memory at the speed of data. Even so, there remain those who resist the editing. Independent journalists, whistleblowers, historians, and teachers who fight to preserve the raw, uncomfortable truth. They dig through archives, uncover suppressed documents, and publish stories that governments prefer buried. They remind us that truth, no matter how inconvenient, is the foundation of understanding. But they do so at great risk. The ghosts of history do not like to be exposed. When truth is inconvenient, it is called disloyal. When facts are painful, they are called unpatriotic. In some countries, speaking about certain events can still lead to imprisonment. In others, the punishment is subtler: career loss, social isolation, the quiet exclusion from circles of influence. The mechanisms of control may be modern, but their spirit is ancient. Empires once erased names from stone. Now they erase them from search results. The digital age has given everyone a voice, but not every voice carries the same weight. Algorithms amplify what fits the dominant narrative and silence what challenges it. Facts become slippery, truth becomes negotiable. And in this constant rewriting, we lose something precious: the ability to remember honestly. The ghosts of history, now multiplied by machines, whisper endlessly through our feeds, guiding us toward the stories we want to believe. Yet not all ghostwriting is malicious. Sometimes it is born from the need to heal. Nations emerging from trauma often rewrite their histories to move forward. They build myths of unity to replace memories of division. Families, too, edit their pasts, leaving out pain to preserve love. Perhaps the instinct to reshape memory is not only political, but human. We all want to believe we are part of a story that makes sense, but every rewritten line carries a cost. When we smooth away the edges of history, we lose its lessons. When we forget the pain, we risk repeating it. The truth, however hard, is the map that shows us where we've been. Without it, we wander through illusions, guided by ghosts who speak only what we wish to hear. Imagine now, as you drift deeper into thought, the invisible authors at work across the world. In classrooms, teachers recite lessons from polished textbooks. In newsrooms, editors adjust headlines to fit the mood of the day. In parliaments, speechwriters craft words meant to inspire but not to reveal too much. In the quiet corners of the internet, digital archivists decide what remains visible and what disappears. Each is a ghostwriter, shaping the memory of humanity, one sentence at a time. And still, truth endures in fragments, in forgotten diaries, in declassified files, in testimonies whispered to grandchildren. The full story is never truly lost. It only waits to be rediscovered by those who listen beyond the official voice. History, no matter how tightly controlled, leaks through the cracks. It hums in the background, patient and persistent, like an old song we cannot completely forget. So as the world sleeps somewhere, a new version of history is being written. A word replaced here, a photo cropped there, a headline softened to protect an image. The ghostwriters are awake, shaping tomorrow's memory tonight. And when morning comes, we will read their words, believe their stories, and call it truth. But if you listen closely, beneath the smooth lines, beneath the careful phrasing, you can still hear the faint rustle of what was left out, the voices erased, the facts unspoken, the questions unanswered. Those are the real ghosts, still whispering, still waiting. They are the reminders that history, no matter how often rewritten, belongs not to those who control it, but to those who keep searching for what it hides. And as you let your mind grow quiet, imagine those ghosts surrounding you, not haunting, but watching, patient and calm. They know that every lie has an expiration date, every silence an end. The truth does not rush, it waits. It has outlasted kings, conquerors, and censors. It will outlast us too. In the end, history is never entirely what we are told. It is a tapestry woven with both light and shadow, fact and fiction. And though the modern ghostwriters still hold their pens, truth remains the unseen author, writing quietly, persistently, in the spaces they forget to erase. Every story you've ever heard about the past has another story hidden beneath it. It lies quietly between the lines, in the spaces where words hesitate, in the margins where the ink fades. History, as we know it, is not only what was written, it's what was left out. Every document, every chronicle, every monument is a voice, but behind it stands another softer voice whispering the truth that was too fragile, too dangerous, or too inconvenient to speak aloud. The story beneath the story has always been there, waiting for those willing to listen closely enough to hear it. The people who wrote history were not simply recording events, they were shaping them. They were human, with ambitions, fears, loyalties, and beliefs. Their pens moved not only for truth but for purpose. A chronicler in a king's court might have softened a defeat to preserve his ruler's honor. A monk in a monastery might have adjusted a pagan legend to fit Christian morals. A scholar under empire might have altered a map so that his homeland appeared smaller, safer, less threatening to the conqueror. These choices, small and silent, built the world we now call the past. When we read history, we often imagine it as a clear window into what happened. But really, it's a mirror, one that reflects the values of those who wrote it. Every age has its own lens. The ancient scribes of Egypt wrote to please gods and pharaohs. The medieval chroniclers wrote to glorify the church. The historians of empires wrote to justify expansion, while revolutionaries wrote to inspire change. Truth, meanwhile, lingered in the background, constant, but never fully visible. Consider the stories of conquest that fill so many pages. We read of heroes and victories, of civilization spreading to new lands, of discovery and destiny. Yet beneath those words lie other voices, the conquered, the displaced, the silenced. Their version of the story rarely made it onto parchment or stone. Their grief, their loss, their resistance were spoken in languages that power did not preserve. But even erased, they remain. The soil remembers. The ruins remember. The story beneath the story hums softly in every forgotten name. Even, peace has its hidden tale. Treaties are signed, borders drawn, and celebrations held. But behind the polished signatures and grand declarations lie the compromises, the betrayals, the whispered deals made in darkened rooms. Every victory for one side is a quiet loss for another. Yet history prefers to speak of triumphs, of beginnings, of progress. The pain that made them possible is tucked away, too heavy for the page. The truth beneath history often survives in small, fragile ways. In a letter that was never meant to be found, in a rumor passed from generation to generation, in a song that carries memory disguised as melody. These fragments tell us that history is not one great story, but millions of overlapping ones, each incomplete on its own. What we read in books is only the surface, polished, organized, made to seem whole. But beneath it lies the living mess of humanity. Arguments, mistakes, dreams, regrets. Bias is not always malicious. Sometimes it comes from love. A historian protecting his homeland's pride. A writer preserving a legend because it gives people hope. Ambition, too, leaves its mark. The desire to be remembered, to influence, to belong. And belief, that quiet but powerful force, colors everything. A believer will see miracles where another sees coincidence. A skeptic will see manipulation where another sees faith. History is shaped not by what happened, but by how people believed it happened. And yet belief can make fiction feel truer than fact. Think of the myths that endure even when disproven, the noble founders, the golden ages, the chosen people. They give identity and comfort, which is why they are so hard to let go of. To question them feels like betraying something sacred. But in the margins of these myths, another truth lingers, less perfect, more human. It tells us that heroes were flawed, that victories came with cost, that progress is not a straight line but a series of circles, each generation repeating what it thinks it has learned anew. There are also stories written in silence. The people who could not write, who were forbidden to speak, who lived and died in the shadow of others' words. Their truths did not vanish. They exist in absence. A missing document, a destroyed library, a gap in a timeline. These are not voids but clues. They tell us that something was there once, something someone did not want remembered. The margins of history are filled not only with what was overlooked, but with what was deliberately erased. Sometimes even those who wrote the official story knew they were hiding something. A chronicler might leave a cryptic note, a change in tone, a suspicious omission, small acts of resistance buried in obedience. It's as if they whispered to the future, hoping someone would notice. And we do centuries later, tracing their careful hesitations, reading between their lines. The story beneath the story isn't always rebellious. Sometimes it's simply honest in a way the surface cannot afford to be. Modern times are no different. News, media, even official records still carry bias, ambition, and belief. The methods have changed. Faster, more polished, more complex, but the motive remains the same: to tell a story that serves a purpose. And still, beneath each headline and each history book, another version waits quietly. The challenge, as always, is to look for it, to see the fingerprints of those who wrote and the shadows of those who could not. When you start to notice the hidden layers, the world feels different. You begin to see that history is alive, breathing through contradiction. Every fact has a feeling attached to it. Every record has a reason it exists. Even the simplest artifact, a coin, a diary, a stone, carries both what it reveals and what it conceals. The story beneath the story is not an enemy to truth. It is truth's companion. It reminds us that understanding is not found in certainty, but in curiosity. As you imagine the great halls of ancient scribes or the dusty rooms of modern historians, picture them surrounded by the ghosts of those whose stories they could not include. The air is heavy with what was never said. Yet those unspoken truths press gently against the edges of the written word, shaping it, haunting it. That is how the past truly survives, not as a fixed account, but as a living tension between what was told and what was not. And when you close your eyes and think of the history you've learned, the kings, the wars, the revolutions, the inventions, imagine the quieter scenes behind them. The wife who waited for a soldier who never returned. The scribe who hesitated before writing a lie. The child who listened to a story that would one day be called a myth. These are the threads that hold the grand tapestry together. Without them, the picture would collapse. In the end, the story beneath the story is what gives history its soul. It is the breath behind the words, the heartbeat behind the dates. It reminds us that the past was not written by fate but by people, flawed, hopeful, afraid, and endlessly human. Their mistakes and motives are part of the truth, just as much as their achievements. To read history without seeing the story, beneath it is to see only half the world. So as you let your thoughts drift, think of the countless unwritten lines floating through time, the missing voices, the erased names, the quiet truths that persist despite every effort to silence them. They are still here, just beneath the surface, humming softly like an old melody you almost remember. The truth isn't lost, it's just waiting, written in the margins, whispering patiently for someone to read between the lines.